Welcome to Feeling Beings Who Think, a podcast project that seeks to find wisdom in conversation through the stories and personal reflections of regular people like you and me. My name is Erin Rice, and I'm really grateful you're here. So let's get started. The Buddha was once asked, "Are you divine or are you human?" And Buddha answered, "I am awake." In Christianity, the teacher Jesus gets asked the question a lot too. Is Jesus human or divine? Which I might say can be a distraction from the point. And one of the things Jesus also does is encourage his followers to keep awake. What do you think and feel both of these teachers are asking us to be awake too? Well, in my conversation today with Erin Jean Warde, Episcopal priest, spiritual director, recovery coach, and author of the soon-to-be-released book, Sober Spirituality, we talk about this and a lot of other stuff. I love that title, Sober Spirituality, and I think it has a lot to do with both our desire and sometimes our frustration to pay attention or keep awake to the priceless moments in our life that happen every day in our ordinary time, to the belovedness that is in you and me and all around us. Erin and I met through the Daring Way, and we're both facilitators of Brené Brown's work. We talk a little bit about that. But for me, that work is all about cultivating meaningful connection, allowing ourselves, as Brené says, to be truly seen and to truly see others. And that sounds a lot like keeping awake to me. So Erin and I talk about what gets in the way of being present and seeing in that way. Things like the simplistic and shame-based teachings of our faith tradition, the numbing we do when we don't want to feel our feelings, even when those feelings are good, and that busyness, all those distractions that are hard to pull ourselves away from. Just two more notes about this conversation. First, thanks for putting up with my voice. It's not 100% right now, but thankfully it was when I talked with Erin. Also, as you may know, this is a one-woman production. Please excuse the old-fashioned answering machine interruption that makes its way into this recording. Also, please know, on a more serious note, that the topic of suicide is also a part of what we discuss. Okay, now let's get to that. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy this one. Hi there, Erin Jean Warde.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me, friend.
No, this is a very joyful, exciting opportunity for me. I am grateful how we've reconnected in the recent past, and it's enabled us to already be in relationship to be ready to do this.
Yes, what a gift. I mean, I met you years and years and years ago, but as much as the internet does have downfalls, I think it also has real gifts, which is the fact that I can still know you and still talk to you and reconnect and do all the things that we're doing right now.
Yeah. Just to explain that a little bit, Erin and I met in Navasota, Texas, when both of us were put randomly into the same cohort of clergy that were getting trained in the Daring Way out of a group of 200 plus clergy that had come from around the diocese, and I think even from Canada and maybe even Australia. Some people were there from there.
Wow.
And then, we went on our way, and I did see you on Facebook. And then we reconnected through the church and through work you're doing, and specifically your upcoming book, Sober Spirituality.
Yes. And also I got to go to Baltimore. And so we got to have brunch, one of my favorite meals of the day, and reconnect. Although like you, the way that we sort of follow people and may not talk to them all the time, but keep in touch with them and want to keep in touch with them. We want to look at their posts. I feel like I've always been, since we parted, like I want to see your posts when they show up, and I want to hear what's going on in your life. And that's kind of the gift of our interesting internet age.
It is. And it's also a gift of creativity in the ways in which we live into our vocations in the world. All right. So here's my first question that came to me this morning. And I think it's a question that's appropriate for our conversation. And I have a feeling will lend itself into you starting from wherever you want to start to talk about your call and callings and career. So this morning, we had this joyful event of a lot of children coming together from different schools to do a worship service, which is something that hasn't happened in a really long time because of the pandemic. And the minutes, and it was simple. It was just a chapel service. They sing, I tell a story. It's cute. I've done it many times. The minute the kids started singing, I felt tears like streaming down my face. And that both surprised me and didn't surprise me, because lately I have that happen in situations that I'm used to, but that intensity, that poignancy, the poignancy of being aware of what I get to be a part of really overwhelms me. I also connect that with sober spirituality in ways that have to do with what sober means in terms of alcohol, and in ways that have to do with that word beyond alcohol. So I want to ask you what even touches, connects, resonates with you about what I said, because from your writings, I'm reading, I'm in your book club. I'm enjoying the book. I read your readings. I actually quoted you in something you talked about recently regarding what feeds our soul feeds other souls as well. It's not just our soul. And one of the things you do write about really well is your feelings and how you utilize them, not always as facts, but certainly as barometers and things that you should be paying attention to. So I'm going to stop talking now and ask you to say something.
Well, I love your image of watching the children sing, because I had a very similar experience in early sobriety. I lived in Oklahoma, and there was this park. It's a beautiful park, and it had all of these like wildlife creatures that I was always so excited to see. I mean, a deer could stand feet from me. I'd turn a corner around an alcove and see that. If I went early enough, the beavers would still be out. I'd catch one literally eating a tree that I walked past every day. And one day I was walking, and I just looked over, and there was a mother duckling with a trail of ducklings behind her, and they were all headed toward the lake. And one of the ducklings just like kind of toppled over and rolled a little. You know how babies aren't so sure on their feet. They just kind of rolled and then popped back up and kept moving. And I was overcome with joy to the point of tears. And one of the things that I think about a lot, and this is in a lot of my writing as well, is just this holy noticing, being awake enough to your life to see that and not miss it. And I think for a very long time, without meaning to, I was so numb from what ethanol does to the human body that I just wouldn't have maybe noticed that. Or I would have thought, oh, that's cute, and I would have moved on with my life. And when that's your norm, you're just like, oh, this is what it means to be alive. But something about sobriety was such a deep spiritual awakening for me that when I see those things, I notice them and I let them affect me. And they affect me in such profound, beautiful ways that inevitably feel like I am with God. And I'm able to look into God's creation and feel connected to it and feel real gratitude. Not thanks God, I really appreciate all you do up there, but really moved by the reality of creation around me. And that is still a skill. The book that we're reading in book club is How to Do Nothing, Resisting the Attention Economy by Jenny Odell, which is an incredible book. And a lot of that is about attention and where we're putting that. And so even as a person almost 4 years sober, I'm still learning how to build the attention muscle. You know, I can still find myself on my phone a lot. And I actually made my little patio, which is what I keep looking at. My little patio is a phone-free zone. And so I go out there and I sit and I read and I drink my morning coffee and I just notice. I notice little birds. I notice my neighbors and their dogs. And I'm not saying I wouldn't have noticed it before, but previously I would have had to notice it through the numbing of alcohol. And even in sobriety, I would have to have noticed it through being on my phone. You know, it would be that I would look up from my phone and see something, as opposed to the really unmitigated experience of when you're noticing, and then what is filled in that space is beautiful.
So I feel like we've jumped right in to something pretty intense, and I don't want to do anyone listening a disservice by not understanding some of what brings you and I to be talking about sobriety, and that through the lens of, I think, our own personal stories and also the worlds in which we live, being clergy, being coaches, being Daring Way facilitators, basically working in various spheres that encourage human flourishing, right? Encourage us embracing ourselves, feeling worthy of love and belonging, and then looking at the ways we numb ourselves or tell ourselves stories or run from the feelings and thoughts that disconnect us from ourselves, which Brene Brown would, say shame, right? The things that trigger our shame. So maybe that's somewhere for you to start with. How is it that that this is your world?
Yes, I love that question. So much comes to mind for me. I mean, one thing I just want to focus on is something that we learned through our Brene Brown training, which is when you numb the dark, you numb the light.
Yeah.
And so even as a person who, my relationship with alcohol was not a conscious numbing. And I think most people's relationship with drug use of any sort is often not a conscious numbing. It's, I want to just let off some steam. I want to kick back. I want to have fun. But you're not noticing that when you do that, you do have stress in your life that is encouraging you to want to sort of come down after a busy, exhausting, stressful day at work. But even if what you're doing is coping with a difficult reality, which we are all coping, there is nothing wrong with coping. Coping is necessary. But even if what you're doing is coping with something that's going on in your life, you are also still numbing yourself to joy. And again, I wouldn't have known that until I removed the numbing factor. And for me, my sobriety journey, which is, I think, what you're asking about, it was, doing our Brene Brown training and getting all this learning about shame and how that was functioning in my body. Although that did not bring me into sobriety. I think it brought me into a consciousness around the function of shame in my life. But I kept drinking and really got the inkling years before I quit that I didn't like it anymore, that there was something about it that I was like, I just don't like my relationship with alcohol, which is the language I would use now. I had no language for it then. I just was like, I don't like this, whatever it is. But it's very difficult to quit drinking, especially in contexts where there is a really intense alcohol culture. And we have a broad alcohol culture, right?
I was going to say, exactly where is the context where there is not a strong alcohol culture?
Well, what's interesting is I'm learning there are some in our world. I have a client who, one of the things that she decided to do is she was like, when I did CrossFit, which I will never do CrossFit, as just a disclaimer, but she was like, what I realized is the only friends I have that are sober, I met through CrossFit. So what I think I'm going to do is go to CrossFit more, because I'm going to surround myself with those people. I'm going to rekindle those friendships, and I'm going to start to have sober community. But I really didn't have any of those communities. I mean, for anyone who's listening who is not super familiar with the Episcopal Church, it can be a very heavy alcohol culture. Then we have the permeating culture. You know, I always say, watch one sitcom and tell me there isn't at least one mention of them going out and getting drunk together or having drinks together.
I'll watch any TV show that has, especially if there's a female lead, and count how many times she's holding a gigantic glass of wine.
Exactly. Except, you know, The Flight Attendant might have been the only show that actually did that plot line, but wove in some recovery. If you're looking for a recovery TV show, Flight Attendant is pretty good. But, you know, we've got this permeating alcohol culture, and I just didn't know how to get out of it. And so I always say, like, damn, if we don't choose the devil, we know. You know, it's like, I had these questions in front of me, and I thought it was very black and white. I thought it was, you know, quit drinking forever, never touch it again, cold turkey sober, or keep drinking exactly the way I'm drinking right now. And I chose to keep drinking the way I was drinking right then, because I didn't know how to do the other. And what I have tried to do with my work is, in some ways, create what wasn't there for me. I did join an online sobriety community, and but that was 2 months in. That was to solidify my sobriety. I spent a lot of my sober time completely alone, or at least feeling completely alone, because, you know, as I always joke, my church hosted AA, the only AA in the county. So I was not about to roll in there, you know. I always joke that if my parishioners had seen my car in the parking lot, they would have tried to find me to ask why the light was out over the altar. Because when you're a priest at a church and somebody sees that your car is there, they're like, oh, let me grab Mother Erin and ask her that quick question that's been nagging me all day, especially in a small town where I was. So AA was kind of off the table. I did join a community, but I spent many years in a very interior space of sober curiosity. I have a chapter in the book titled, you know, reading the big book with a box of Chardonnay, because I would come home from drinking with my friends and literally curl up with the AA book, because I didn't know how to do it, but I knew I wanted to figure out what was going on. And so now I'm a recovery coach, spiritual director. I do lots of different things, but one of the things I'm explicitly trying to do is help people who don't necessarily know where they want it to go. I got to a place where I knew I wanted to get sober, but for a while I didn't know. I was like, I don't know if I want to be sober, but I know I don't like how I drink. And so my coaching is for people who want to change their relationship with alcohol in any way, because there isn't a ton, from what I've noticed. I could be wrong. There could be other resources. There isn't a ton of recovery stuff that is for people who are in that middle way. I do think Jolene Park has done incredible work with gray area drinking, but I do not create a space where the assumption is that we are going to definitely get you sober. I want the person in front of me to have agency and to have their own direction into where they feel called to go.
Okay, I feel called to go in many different directions with that. And if you don't mind, I'd like to dial back to that Brene Brown training a little bit. Sure. And to talk a little bit about, I heard you talking about something I can relate to, something I think many people can relate to. Certainly it's been in many of my conversations with friends and peers. I have this feeling that I want something to change, and I don't know what it is, and I don't even know what to say that feeling is called. Can you just maybe talk a little bit about that? And I don't, it's hard for me a little bit to remember everything, you know, that was what, 6 years ago when we did that. I certainly remember it was life-changing.
Yes.
On a lot of levels. I also remember, Erin, and tell me if I'm off base, but am I correct that somebody close to you had ended their life and you talked about that? Is it okay to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. No, we talked a bit about this in the training, and it's a part of my spiritual path, which is that I was in just the tender years of undergraduate, and a friend of mine died by suicide. And at the time, I was in a fundamentalist context, and the theological questions that were asked often revolved around whether or not he was in heaven or hell. And in that context, the sort of formula ended up being, well, killing someone is a sin, regardless of who it is. And, you don't have the ability to confess and repent. Ergo, that is an unconfessed sin. So we think this person's probably in hell. And I'm 20 years old and I'm dealing with the really first time in my life with something as traumatic as suicide. And someone's basically like, yeah, he's probably in hell. And I just thought to myself, if that's God, I want no part of it. And I spent about a year of being sort of involved in church a little bit. And it wasn't until I was able to come to my own beliefs and say, that's not God. Whatever that was, that's not God. And then I was able to rekindle my relationship with God. And then I actually also became Episcopalian because the views there were much more open and there was a more gracious view of how that works. People around me were saying radical things like they didn't even believe in hell. And I immediately quit believing in hell. Like when that happened and they were like, your friend is in hell, I was like, then it must not exist, because my friend had mental health challenges and going to do this. Like the second I realized it wasn't God, I was like, absolutely not. But that was a really traumatic experience to then shape my faith.
I remember that cohort of people, so much of the power of that experience was being given permission to feel in a group of people. There's just so many areas, and I do think this connects with choosing sobriety. Feelings are not only overwhelming for us individually, especially when something tragic has happened, like somebody we love who's close to us ended their life. And then the tragedy is compounded because everyone around us is like doing the blame shame thing about it. But then we're constantly worried about the way other people are going to either bear or not bear the feelings that we are bringing into the room or that we're bringing into the conversation. I think one of the things that was amazing about Brene Brown's work is how so much of it is how do you do the very beginnings of a conversation and a gathering to create that kind of brave space. I do think 12 steps seem to, my experience as a member of Al-Anon, a 12-step group does an incredible job of creating, a container for that space. I'm trying to figure out how to ask the question around, there's something about both needing to feel that pain that is really, really important and necessary and is completely what connects with not wanting to numb those other feelings and being present and attentive to your life. Mm-hmm. I don't know, maybe how do you see that keep changing and growing in you over time as you get older?
Yes.
Wiser, let's just say you're wiser now, because I think you are. and also 4 years into your sobriety.
Yeah, I think we're all wiser,
Mm-hmm.
So that's something we can all take with us. When I think about feelings, it's interesting because when you're numb, you're not feeling them, but the effects of them are still affecting you. One of the things we talked about in our training was how when you kind of push down emotions, they lodge in your body, right? Like they don't go anywhere. Your fears don't disappear because you don't look into them. They're still plaguing you. Mm-hmm. And what I have found in sobriety is that because I am more forced to face them, those feelings actually pass. When you give them a minute to show up and you sit down and you give them the time of day, they're satisfied in some regards and they'll leave, and not forever. But there was actually a study done that I love to use in my coaching practice that said that, like, psychologically in the sort of brain and neural way, a feeling lasts 90 seconds. Mm-hmm. So if you start to have a feeling, as I tell my clients and as I do for myself, and it feels overwhelming and you get that itch to numb it, which in sobriety, that does not mean that I still don't want to grab a bag of cookies, right? Like we all have that way that we want to get out of it. If you set a timer, I will literally set a timer for 1 minute, 30 seconds, and I will sit and I will just feel that feeling. That's it.
Yep.
And sometimes I'll say over and over again, which the shame resilience training taught us this too. Like, just say it. What is it? Shame, 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 shame. Like, all you have to do is just sit there and just say what it is. And I'll just sit there and I'll just say it. Anger, 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 anger. I'm so angry. Or if it is anger, I'll sort of in my head, let them have it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'll just feel what I feel, say what I would say to the person in front of me. And then the alarm goes off and I will physically feel my shoulders drop. My body's literally letting me know it is not storing that. Or I'll go on a walk. That's a way to get the energy out. So it's not going to become chronic pain for me because I have a chronic pain condition. And so I think you are not helping those feelings by drinking through them. If anything, you're putting them off and they're setting up shop. They've now got a guest room. They're much more present in your life because you're not feeling them than they would be in your life in a negative sense if you were feeling them. Plus, as you and I both experienced, when you let yourself feel the unmitigated reality of your feelings, you also get the unmitigated reality of pure joy. So much so that it could bring you to tears. And one of the things that Brene Brown says is, we've got to let ourselves feel those positive feelings because that's how we get the reserves to then acknowledge and deal with the difficult feelings when they show up. So when you're numbing it, you're not only not fixing it, you're also not getting the reserves of joy that you need in order to have perspective and positivity in order to deal with the realities of life, right? Because these feelings are going to happen. You're going to be scared. You're going to be worried.
Or you're going to not even know sometimes what the feeling is. I mean, that was another huge part of that work. And I just, I have no problem, since we're both, facilitators of this work too, just spending some time sharing how we, maybe just even personally use this work. And that idea of putting a name on feelings. Sometimes the feeling we don't want to sit with for 90 seconds. And I do love that you say that thing about setting a timer. I read that in your piece this morning. I love setting timers for things. It helps me create a safe container, right? To know there's a beginning and an end.
Yes, it will end.
Right.
This feeling will end in this way.
And sometimes the feeling isn't one we even could name. And it's usually like a boredom, a restlessness, a sense of I should be doing something. Just the idea, you talked about this also this morning, which I completely resonate with, permission to rest. Like, I'm actually just tired. I shouldn't have a cup of tea right now. I should maybe just close my eyes and set a timer and sleep.
What if I didn't have a third coffee?
Yeah.
And because we push through, right? And alcohol also helps us push through when we need to rest. It's when you don't want to go to the work function. I talk about this all. That when I was in a job that just had long hours, at least, what I was go home and go to bed, but gosh, I've got to go to this thing at the church, but at least they got wine, so I'll drink wine. It's like I'm pushing past what was really good for my body. And go ahead.
Well, no, I mean, that's one of the ways where the church is just like any other corporate culture. And I don't mean corporate in a profit sense. I mean corporate as in a large group of people. I mean, when I worked in marketing, we had attitude adjustment Fridays. Attitude adjustment Fridays were when it was cocktail hour. It was just happy hour.
Oh, wow. That's what they called it?
So it was attitude adjustment at like 3:00, one Friday a month. And it was just food and drink. And then you'd go out drinking afterwards. This is just a part, I think, of the working world. And it is hard to find ways in which we engage socially. And by the way, my CrossFit experience, the group of bonding, CrossFit did an amazing job, and I think does an amazing job of creating belonging. But my particular experience was also around like doing tequila shots and working out, And
that's why I was trying to say, like, she realized, I made some sober friends through this group. Mm-hmm. So it is not a one size fits all. This is not an advertisement for CrossFit.
No, and I'm saying, I just think that idea, it just permeates our world. It just permeates it. The other thing I wanted to get back to, though, because we were talking about Brene Brown and that work, maybe you listened to her recently, her most recent Dare to Lead. It's with Simon Sinek and Adam Grant. And she's basically asking, what's one of the challenges right now? And they have it seems a consensus, if I'm paraphrasing it correctly, we are in a place of resistance towards the new reality and to what is. We are not all going back to what was. That's never going to happen. Certain people are resisting that. They want everybody back at the office, just like we want everybody back at church, or some of us want everybody back to the spaces that we were used to seeing people in. And it's different and going to be changing. And there's going to be a period of time when there's no answers and no closure and no sense of knowing. And that feeling around risk, uncertainty, emotional exposure, it's just pure vulnerability.
Yes. And that is something that I think we have to learn how to cope with. That's why I think that coping is actually really necessary. One of the things that I talk to my clients about, sometimes I'll tell my clients, you got to have some positive coping mechanisms. And they're like, well, I'll start going to the gym. And I pause them and I say, do you love going to the gym? And they're like, man, no, but I probably should. And I'm like, then that cannot be it. You need to have gratuitous things that are fun, joyful, that you look forward to doing the way that you currently think of alcohol. You currently let loose, let your hair down, think of alcohol as being that way that you get to really get out there and have fun. Whatever you sub in for that needs to rival that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it can't be, I'll just do more work. We can't work ourselves out of this. We're not going to do more profitable ways of healing. We've got to think about what is the true joy that's going to rival what we think we're getting out of alcohol. And a story that came up in my mind, this is to go back a little bit about feeling your feelings, but it's such a good image from my own life that I think it's really important, especially because it shows how I don't use positive coping mechanisms sometimes. I let myself cope however I need to because I'm sober and I'm like, you've done a lot of work and you get to do whatever you want kind of, but I had this feeling something had happened. I was stewing on it, but I didn't want to feel it. And so I did the thing we do where I binge watched a ton of Netflix. I was on Twitter a bunch. I've eaten a bunch of food, which I love food and I will never hate on it. But there is a point where I know I'm numbing through food.
Yes.
And then finally, literally on Sunday afternoon, I get my phone and I do a meditation on the thing I was struggling with, 7 minutes. And during those 7 minutes, I feel the feeling pass. And it was such a wake-up call to me that I thought to myself, you wasted a whole weekend. You could have sat for 7 minutes and had a whole weekend. And so now it helps me bridge the gap, shorten the gap between when I feel that feeling and I handle it versus when I push it down. And so that's why I tell people, set that 1.5 minute thing. I guarantee you it's going to be days versus at least a little time. Not that it's going to disappear. You're still going to have feelings, but it's going to help you manage them positively.
When did you know as an adult what brought you joy?
I wish I knew. I'm still figuring it out. And I genuinely think that, sobriety has been so interesting for me because it really did give me that capacity for joy. But I get it in ways I would not expect, right? Like seen a million ducks in my life. Did not think that would bring me to tears. But I actually have this long-standing conversation with my spiritual director about what is joy for me, because I think one of the other things about alcohol is it becomes your life in a really weird way. And so you sometimes get sober and you think, man, I don't have a single hobby to speak of because I work and then I go out drinking and I come home and I go to bed, or I work and then I come home and I have a couple glasses of wine and I watch Netflix and I go to bed. And then you get sober and you're like, oh man, I have a lot of time now. Like I remember early sobriety and getting home at 5 o'clock from work and being like, I have 6 hours. So what am I going to do with this time?
But part of that, well, that's what I was going to say. It's stressful because the feeling of just being is a hard place to be in. And that the book that we're reading, the Attention Economy, I'm going to just share a little story here, because one of the examples she utilizes is I think she's going to see John Cage's 4 minutes and 33 seconds. So for people who may not know, John Cage was a avant-garde contemporary art musician in the oh my, I'm going to get the date wrong, like 50s, 60s, 70s. And one of the pieces he's sort of most popularly famous for is 4 minutes and 33 seconds, where somebody comes out, they sit down at a piano and play nothing. And the audience is mostly forced to sit there, although I'm sure people leave, and be in the silence. And it's not fully silent because there's always sounds. And I knew of John Cage because of my time at New England Conservatory of Music, which is where I did my undergraduate. And we had a John Cage festival a few years before he died. And I have to tell you, I thought that was the stupidest thing ever before the festival happened. Being somebody who really used to put everything in a right, wrong, black, white category. Yeah. Everything was a binary, and contemporary music was stupid. I was at a conservatory. I was there to study classical music, the Western European tradition primarily. And it is a rich, wonderful tradition, but it's not the only type of music there is. So John Cage came. Our choir had to do the piece that she also talks about in the book, when she talks about the orchestra and how, and the choir, how everybody's doing crazy things in the auditorium, like riding a bicycle, and Michael Tilson Thomas makes a shake and just insane stuff. So we had to perform that piece. Wow. And I was so livid with anger when we were told that we had to perform this piece. But then I met John Cage. He came and he spoke with us. And first of all, he was one of the most gentle, kind people. And in the conservatory world, you meet a lot of tough people, right? It's very disciplined. It's really hard. The conservatory was wonderful, but also a terrifying place. And he wasn't like that. He just had qualities of being a real, genuine, good spirit. And exactly what she said in the book happened to me. This idea of once you experience the piece, once you experience being in a setting like a concert hall and nothing happens that you're used to happening, you're just used to it going a certain way. All of a sudden, everything's upended. And you walk out of that space and everything you hear is music. The traffic is music. The people talking is music. Sounds, just all, you're bombarded with this reality of the symphony of life that is happening, you know? That was a long descriptive way of my saying what you are saying about being present to our life, which I think also connects with Brené's work around grateful for the ordinary. Right? It's not, we're seeking joy sometimes in like, what's the extraordinary or what's the achievement? But this podcast for me, I'm having conversations with, what I say in one of the intros, are regular people, right? You and I are people. We're out there. We're trying to do good in the world, build up a good world. And sometimes that joy is simply being okay with just being. Like you talked about going out on your porch with the plants.
Well, and my post tomorrow, I do the book club with my paid subscribers, is all about the fact that I think it's not just about the fact that, you know, John Cage says, you know, or the 433 is going to mean that the ambient noise becomes the peace. But also what I say is when we allow ourselves to sit in the silence, silence will inevitably be filled, but it will be filled by what is around us or what is inside us. And I talk about sitting right here in this chair, typing my Substack, and the different sounds I hear. And the fact that just those sounds, when I really paid attention to them, brought me into gratitude, because I could hear my cat pawing at a piece of paper. I can hear my cat's water fountain. I can hear my air conditioner. I'm typing on the computer. So what does that make me feel? Grateful I have a computer. Grateful I have air conditioning. Grateful I have these animals, right? Like, it really genuinely brought me into a space of gratitude. And the other part of it for me is meditation. And meditation is part of that sitting, part of that noticing that helps that silent, with scare quotes around it, space be filled with what is inside me. And that's part of that feeling.
So I want to bring up a framework that I think is meaningful to both of us, which is the framework of Jesus and Christianity, because I can't remember our conversations back there in Texas, but what was the most powerful for me in that work was every single thing that we were being taught in terms of that framework of vulnerability, courage, and shame resilience was my complete theological understanding of what I was taught in the scripture stories. and particularly, everything we're talking about right now. And so maybe just shift a little bit and talk about how this work connects with that faith framework for you.
Yes, even when I was thinking, as you were talking through your John Cage experience, one of the most profound spiritual realities I've connected with is the ordinary being holy. And, thinking about Jesus, and one of the things that I love about him is he would just be traveling and someone would interrupt him and he was willing to be interrupted. And so, you hear the passages of people who are just trying to grab the hem of his cloak, and he actually stops and gives them his attention, gives them his presence. And that was healing, that was blessing, that was this radical ministry, that he could encounter a woman thirsty at a well, and he didn't just give her spiritual platitudes, he also gave her water.
Mm-hmm.
And that is simple, and yet that is profound. And so not always seeking out the big flashy thing, but thinking, what is the simple beauty? And then realizing that those were the things that Jesus was really pointing us toward. Jesus was saying, does a lily toil over its growth, right? He's like pointing at birds, pointing at flowers, pointing at the water and fish, and he's pointing at the simple things. He's pointing at bread, right? And so my life can also slow down enough to see these simple things in front of me and notice that they are of God and that they hold blessing. And as far as my sobriety is concerned, I describe it as being nothing less than my resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
I genuinely think that obviously we believe that like baptism is a resurrection experience, but I feel like I came alive, and I deeply cherish my life. I don't sort of have like a ton of self-hatred. I work on self-hatred toward my life before I was drinking, but I don't look back and think, oh, that was all a waste, right? I just think that there is something, mind, body, and soul, that has shifted in my life such that today I am better than I've ever been. And I trust that tomorrow I will say that the same. And that is abundant life to me. I feel like I live fully inside the abundant life that Jesus Christ has offered me.
Mm-hmm. What is it that you want people to know about? Because it's bringing you energy and joy these days.
What do I want people to know about that brings me energy and joy? I love autumn. So I will always give a shout out to how the seasons affect me. I think noticing the seasons and letting myself be captivated by that, in the sense that, one of the we talk about these small joys. I live in Texas. So when I walked outside and there was even a light crisp in the air, I was overwhelmed with joy, like in a way that we joke about in memes and tweets and things. But I was like, no, like I am noticing this on my skin. And I know that my favorite season is coming, and I am taking profound joy in that. I am also really getting a lot out of this book that we're reading, the book about the attention economy. And I'm trying to put some energy toward my attention and where it's going within a larger question that I'm looking at, which is just what identity means for us. So I'm right now researching, studying, and looking into what it means to become who we are. Because I think we're all in that process. But for me, sobriety was this profound reconciliation between who I am and who I think God has called me to become.
Yeah.
And I want to dig into this question of how is it that we become who we are?
Yeah. What I lean into again and again is love who you are and who you are becoming. And that kind of grew out of thinking, an earlier statement I used to live by was, I am always the problem I am trying to solve. Meaning that anytime there was something challenging, I needed to first look at my role, or what I just needed to look at me. And there's validity to that. But then I got to a place of not really wanting to think about myself as a problem, like that, that I'm a person, I'm not a problem. And if God loves me as who I am right now, and God's going to draw me into whatever I'm becoming, then why can't I also, partner with God in that love? So I love the idea of studying our identity and how it's connected with who we're becoming. So before I close the conversation, say something more about your book and sober spirituality, because it's really, really exciting.
I'm so excited. Thank you for bringing that up. I get so into talking to people. I'm like, yeah, whatever. I wrote a book. No, but I wrote a book and I'm very excited about it. It's called Sober Spirituality: The Joy of a Mindful Relationship with Alcohol. It is intended to help readers look into both cultural and personal relationships with alcohol from a variety of different viewpoints, all while trying to affirm that we are beautiful in mind, body, and soul, and that we are called into goodness and joy. And I tease out a little bit what joy means in that context and also what mindfulness means in that context, but it just really looks at a lot of different facets. I think it's helpful for people who want to re-examine their relationship with alcohol or who want to look into how alcohol functions in our spiritual communities. I also spend some time talking about the health effects of alcohol, because that's real and that's something that we have to be attentive to. But it's written in a way that it intends to not cause shame, because the real bedrock of my work is shame resilience, as you and I are both trained in. But I was thinking a lot about your comment that you just made, and self-compassion is actually really the root of the work. I think often when we're trying to quit drinking, if we drink, we beat ourselves up about it, and that actually just keeps us in a shame cycle, and our shame cycle always sends us toward numbing, right? So by beating ourselves up for drinking, if we're trying to quit, we actually send ourselves toward drinking again. And so if we can start to interrupt that and meet that with self-compassion, that's when I think we begin to see really profound change. And to relate it to Jesus, one of the things that hit me, I think it was maybe like a year ago or so, as I was sitting here and I was thinking, if I am to love my neighbor as myself, right now, that's not great at all. Because I don't love myself very much. Right now, if I'm to love my neighbor as myself, well, I treat myself terribly. So that would mean I could say a whole host of things I would never say to anyone else. So in order to love my neighbor as myself, I do also have to love myself, and then let that be a wellspring out of which I'm able to love others. And so I really think we can think of it as selfish, and I think of it as giving me the well to draw from when someone comes to me and asks for water. In addition to my book, I do want to shout out that I have a course, Discerning Sobriety. If you want to do it, it's 40 days of emails, and it gives you 20 lessons and 20 spiritual practices that help individuals bring discernment, so holy listening practices, into just asking the question, how do I want to be in a relationship with alcohol? So as with all my work, it does not assume that by the end of it, you need to quit drinking. It assumes that you can discern the role of alcohol in your life. We've also talked a little bit about my Substack. I do 2 free weekly posts every week. One debuted today, and it is the Healing Moment. So I give practical tools and support, which I'm really excited about because I want people to get free practical tools to care for themselves. I also do a newsletter, and then the paid community does a book club. And if you're interested in any of that, or if you're interested in spiritual direction, you can check out my website, because I'm taking clients in all forms. I'm taking recovery coaching clients. I also launched a new coaching program, but I won't take up too much of your podcast's time on that. But I have a lot of offerings. They're all on my website. I would love to hear from listeners if there's anything I can do to offer you some support.
Yeah, and I think that idea of looking at relationships in communities.
Other thing I'll mention on that note is I actually had a whole church do my course together.
Wow.
It wasn't a whole church, I shouldn't say that, but they offered it to whole church, and they had a small group do it, which still a congregation willing to do a full small group. And so if you are like the leader of a congregation and you'd like sort of a 40-day ideal for Lent, opportunity to do that together. I'm happy to see how we could make that work, do bulk rates and things like that so that it's not, each individual person paying for it. So I always want to work with communities in the ways that I can. I've also done consultations with churches around how to really become a more welcoming and loving place for people who are sober, because the church can sometimes be the hardest place to be sober.
Yes.
And we're both priests. I grieve that really deeply. And I want to support and help congregations that want to make sure that their hospitality extends to visitors and people who don't drink.
Yep. Erin, thank you for taking time and talking with me, sharing more of your story. Thank you for the work that you put into the world and your energy and spirit. I personally am very grateful for it, and I am hopeful and grateful that it's being shared in this format. So thank you.
Thank you for the time. Thank you for what you bring into the world. And thanks be to God for ongoing friendship and mutual inspiration. What a gift and blessing.
Amen.